Hello everyone and welcome, and apologies for a slightly scuffed setup in terms of audio and possibly video here. I'm recording this on my laptop on vacation, but I'm gonna give it my best try. So essentially there were some pretty significant Season 3 PTR updates for mostly, huge Dark Ranger nerfs, right? But they mostly in practice are going to end up affecting marksmanship, because marksmanship is sort of what's been like Dark Ranger ride or die on the PTR lately, and also to some extent on live. Whereas Beast Mastery, generally, at least based on testing it, but the problem is, people, when they test Beast Mastery on the PTR, they just kind of go for what they know, right? So there's very limited testing on Beast Mastery Dark Ranger, at least on a sort of large-scale data collection level in terms of like raid testing and so on. Of course, individuals are testing it and whatnot, but it's not really amounting to much in terms of data. Anyway, my point is, these Dark Ranger nerfs that I'm going to discuss in a moment, they're mostly relevant for marksmanship, but then we also have a huge change to the pack leader tier set, and that affects both Beast Mastery and Survival, but arguably Beast Mastery to a more significant degree. So what are the Dark Ranger nerfs? Well, they've cut the damage of Phantom Pain in half, and they've hard capped its damage at 8 targets. So Phantom Pain is the thing that says whenever you have a black arrow on a target, all 30% previously of all the aim shot damage that you do just gets like replicated back to that target. Well, now that's been cut back from 30% on the PTR to 15%. And just for reference, on live servers right now, it's at 24%. So we're looking at a 50% nerf to Phantom Pain damage on the PTR, and roughly just under 40% weaker than it is on live right now. And this really sucks, because this is not just a numbers nerf. Marksmanship could probably do with a bit of a numbers nerf. It's been extremely strong on the PTR. I think the main sad point here is the damage profile that we're losing, right? Because right now marksmanship has this little bit of a niche in that it's really good at doing priority target damage, meaning you have a pack, bunch of mobs, one mob usually has the highest HP, and that mob is the limiting factor in how quickly you can move on with the key and so on. Marksmanship, especially Dark Ranger, is really, really good at that. Now it's losing a significant chunk of that advantage over the alternatives, which is a bit sad. So not only is it a numbers nerf, but it's also a damage profile nerf that hurts Dark Ranger where it sort of really hurts, which is the niche that it had over other like specs of Hunter, other spec hero talent combinations. So I'm pretty sad about that. On top of that, they also massively nerfed Bleak Powder, which is just the straight up AoE mechanic of Dark Ranger. It's the thing doing the majority of your AoE damage. 25 to 35% nerf for that. The reason I say like there's a range on that is because they nerfed the Soul Drinker talent that we were probably always going to run before, which gave 20% Bleak Powder damage. They took that down to 10%. And then in addition to that, they just gave Bleak Powder a straight 25% nerf. So it's sort of like, well, now at this point, like before I would say, okay, you would always run Soul Drinker over the nerfed Shadow Hounds. I still think you will, but it's not as clear cut anymore. And then on top of that again, for marksmanship specifically, they've just straight up nerfed Black Arrow damage by 8%. So overall, pretty substantial nerfs. In terms of raw numbers, I feel like it could afford it. I think Marksmanship Dark Ranger was like close to topping much of the raid test on like most of the bosses, so it certainly wasn't underpowered, and I wouldn't say the nerfs are unwarranted. The main one I'm quite sad about is that they're not just nerfing the outright damage, they're taking a sledgehammer to marksmanship's niche, at least with Dark Ranger here, and so this part is mainly the thing I'm upset about. Next up are the pack leader tier set changes, so this concerns Beast Mastery and Survival. So Stampede's damage and proc frequency have been massively reduced, but the thing is, this was doing like 20, depended a little bit on how good you were at your rotation otherwise, but it was doing a crap ton of damage. Easily, pretty solid double digits just from the Stampede damage. So they've nerfed its damage, and they've also made it proc less frequently. So it used to be the case that it would proc not only from your lead from the front procs, which is basically whenever you pop Beasted Wrath, you get a Howl at the Pack Leader, and that would proc a Stampede. And then in addition to that, you could also have Stampedes that were summoned by sort of natural Howl at the Pack Leader, the cooldown that you track, and then every 20 or so seconds you get a beast. It would also proc on that. That's gone now. So they've cut its proc rate significantly and its damage, and that's probably going to take it from these like almost 20% of your overall down to, you know, probably somewhere in the single digits. Probably high single digits, I would think, but yeah, remains to be seen. They've also hard target capped it of 8. I hate hard target caps of all kinds. This is one of the main things I bring up in feedback concerning marksmanship. So this one really sucks. I don't see why they couldn't just soft cap it, but yeah, that's about it. They have made a practical change though, and a lot of you may have noticed this, is that Beast Mastery damage on the PTR is extremely inconsistent, and a big part of it is really just that the Stampede that comes from the tier set has been working on the old Stampede pathing logic, which was this really narrow line that you just sent at the target, and if the target moved at all, or if, like, you know, it was just, you know, a full moon on a Monday or whatever, it would just not hit the target. So they've massively extended its radius and its pathing logic, and presumably made it follow the target. I don't know fully in depth what they've done here, but it should hit consistently now and not be such a thing that you have to time around boss movement and so on. Hopefully that remains the case at least. And so in practice, you know, that will increase its damage, but, you know, even before, when it worked, you would just like stand in melee and it would work more reliably. That was of course really silly. It's not, you can't really call it a buff because it's just like fixing it to be the way it was always supposed to work. So yeah, just a very, very large nerf to, you know, Beast Mastery in general, because they just, and survival really, because they massively slammed the damage of a super overpowered 4-piece, which is deserved. I think overall the tier set nerf is probably deserved. Like ultimately, whether the power comes from a tier set or from the spec itself is sort of irrelevant, so we'll see sort of in the final analysis how this ends up affecting Beast Mastery and survival in the overall meta. But the hard target cap of 8, that just sucks, especially because Beast Mastery in particular, well, both Beast Mastery and survival are, you know, uncapped specs. They have, you know, soft target caps where they do less damage, but then why is that tier set hard capped? They just, like, it's not consistent with the rest of the design. I'm just not a fan of that kind of stuff. In addition to this, we have some generic Beast Mastery changes. So the old Undermine tier set has been nerfed significantly. They basically like just took a sledgehammer to it, cut its efficiency by like half. So I put Y here. I mean, I guess I can see some. They probably are worried that some of the new talent interactions and whatnot, and pack leader buffs and stuff are interacting with it in a too OP way. But they still, like, they nerfed. It wasn't just like they nerfed it like 10, 20%. They like basically cut it in by over half. This is a pretty minor point. Like, we won't use the old tier set for too long, but it's just kind of, yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't feel good, does it? They've given I mistyped here. It's actually a 3% overall damage buff to BM, but they have nerfed Diebeast's baseline proc rate from 7% to 4%, making it a 40% nerf. But in return, they've also fixed some bugs that prevented Diebeast from spawning, mainly from Bloodshed. So they fixed a negative bug, and they've also fixed a positive bug where Bloodshed would gain double damage benefits from Beastie Wrath. Overall, I think this is roughly DPS neutral. Obviously, the tier set changes, but the Beast Mastery changes on their own. Ignoring the tier set part, I think it's roughly DPS neutral. But of course, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. I do expect that with the tier set nerf, you know, the day the patch lands and sort of for the first week when you're still gathering the new tier, BM will probably be weaker than it is now. At least that's my guess. Next up are some marksmanship changes. So Onaran Winds and Aspect of the Hydra, their radius have been increased. So the problem with Aspect of the Hydra historically has been, it's actually not a bad talent. You know, if you have a fight that's only intermittent cleave or, you know, low target cleave, like it was used on One-Armed Bandit. It can even be used competitively on Styx. It was used on Rig Reverb, mostly in a padding context, but still. Well, they've improved the radius of Aspect of the Hydra so that it will cleave 2 targets more reliably. It was very small before. They've expanded it to 12 yards explicitly. I don't know exactly what it was before. I guess it was 8, but it didn't feel like 8. It felt like 5 or something. But yeah, overall positive change, so pretty happy with that. In the same vein though, they have massively nerfed the Undermine 4-piece, the one we're using now. So the explosive shot that you get from it is now, they basically cut that one's damage by over half. So again, not a huge deal. I guess they figured it was too OP with the new talents. They also made it so that the new shrapnel shot, where you press explosive shot and you just get a lock and load proc for free, they made it so that one doesn't count. I feel like that would have been enough to not make it too silly, but they decided to just nerf it hard. Not too big of a deal though. That brings us to the state of specs in the PTR. So was massively dominant in like all content before, mostly because of Dark Ranger being so strong and synergistic with it. These nerfs overall bring it more in line, and it's still overall, I think marksmanship is probably in a better place than it was for like generic PvE content. But the prio niche being, like the priority target niche being hit so hard kind of sucks. I would have much rather taken a 1 to 2% more overall, but kept the niche. But yeah, it is what it is. Nerfs were definitely expected for this, so I wouldn't, go get your pitchforks just yet. If you're gonna get your pitchforks out about something, it should be the prio damage. Definitely deserved nerfs in general. BM has also looked really good, but it has mostly been riding on, Stampede tier set being so strong. That's now nerfed. So, and also Beast Mastery tends to overperform a little bit in both PTR tests and early in seasons, because Beast Mastery, let's face it, is just very straightforward to play, and so it doesn't, when you're learning a new fight and so on, you don't lose quite as much DPS playing BM as you do other specs. So it tends to overperform a little bit in the beginning, and then as the season goes on and people become more comfortable and the fights become sort of well known to everyone, it tends to drop behind a little bit. So that's always a caveat worth keeping in mind when looking at those spreadsheets with PTR DPS data from the raid testing. I'll put a link to that spreadsheet in the description though. Dark Ranger still looks strong overall. The data is less clear in Beast Mastery and Survival, especially Survival, because Survival is just really underplayed. Everyone knows this. It's very underplayed both on live, but especially on PTR. Only very few people are like, and this is not that like survival hunters don't exist that are testing it on PTR, but I'm talking like in a data aggregation sense, you need quite a few people playing these specs and different hero talents in the raid tests to actually have meaningful data to go off. And in my estimation, survival just doesn't have that yet. It's just something we'll have to wait for Sims on. But yeah. But I still expect that Beast Mastery and Survival will be just fine, even with the tier set nerf that they received. That brings me to just a little bit of an update, I guess, from this channel, and I guess just what I'm up to. I'm on vacation until July 23rd. I'm on vacation right now, but I'm still making this video, so that tells you, I'm still, if the sky falls, I'll still make a video about it and keep you guys updated. There will be spec sims and like meta like just the word meta makes me sick, but there will be thoughts on the relative strength of hunter specs coming probably late July, early August, like in the build-up to the season. Even if there were sims right now, which there aren't, it would be a complete waste of time to run them, in my opinion, except to generate clickbait, which I guess now that I make more YouTube, I'm at least partially in the business of. But I don't want to waste your time with stuff that doesn't actually matter, for the most part. But I tend to make some Q&A videos with Patreon questions in the new season, so it's gonna work like there'll be a channel on my Discord, and probably I'm gonna make it so patrons can leave questions there and others can upvote those questions, and then I'll make videos every few weeks, every month, depends how many questions there are to cover, that are just like literally just Q&A, and it'll be like, if it's a straightforward Q&A and I can just give you the answer in one line, I'll do that. But if it's more of a complicated thing, like how do you review a certain element of logs, then I'll show it on screen and so on. So hopefully that series of Q&A videos will cover a lot of, frequently asked questions and be useful to everybody. I also have some plans of doing like full spec guide videos of some kind. I'm kind of thinking about the format and stuff of those. So it's a lot, right? Because the problem with guide videos historically has been they get outdated very quickly, and theory crafting, at least at the cutting edge, moves fairly quickly, especially early in seasons. But the thing is, you can't wait until deep into the season to drop your guide, right? You want the guide to be out early, but you also don't want to mislead people when things necessarily change throughout the season. So I have to strike a balance there of like, how in depth do I go with a spec guide? Do I give like, okay, here's basically how you play it. Check out my written guide for like the nitty gritty, because that can be updated continuously. I don't know exactly. Still working that out in my head, but let me know what you think. I also intend to do like per boss how to hunter for all the bosses in, well, certainly Mythic and probably also the end boss on Heroic, and I'll be doing those as my guild does them. We're one of the more efficient guilds in the world, like 2-day Hall of Fame, so I'll get to the bosses rather early. And my guild's philosophy is generally like, okay, how can we do this in as few pulls as possible? And obviously, I'm the only hunter in my guild, so it's my job to basically find, okay, what's the most efficient way to play hunter in this fight? Not just in terms of DPS, but in terms of like using our kit to make mechanics as easy as possible. Like sort of schemas for how you might use defensives on a particular fight, and of course how you might use your cooldowns and optimize DPS for the fight in general. That's something I intend to do as I kill the bosses, so be sure to subscribe for that. If you have any other questions or requests for content, then maybe you might leave a comment. That brings me to the plugs. If you like what I do here and want to support it, check out my patreon.com, Azortharion, also linked in the description. You can get my Hunter UI and WeGars for Season 3, which basically just like you install that, and now you have all the UI elements and trackers and buffs and everything you need to play all Hunter specs at a top level in Season 3. And that's just kind of like you install it at the beginning of the season, and then you can get updates, but it's mostly locked in pretty early, and then you don't have to worry about that. Then your UI is sorted. And you can also get access to like coaching videos I make for others, and you can also get coaching yourself at the higher tiers. So yeah, my Discord is also in the description. You should join that even if you're not a sub, because it's the best place to just ping me and ask me a question. Other than that, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you boys and girls in the next one. Bye bye.